Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of the Brand Burger podcast. I'm your host, Braden Matson, Director of Client Strategy at Storybook. Today, I feel the need to get into brand awareness and just awareness overall because there's been a lot of talk and, quite frankly, a ton of confusion about this topic and what terms actually mean. Because if as an industry and a function, we don't even agree on basic stuff like brand awareness, then we're just going to continue talking past each other. And when you get executive leadership in a room together, you're going to have to spend more time than you should have to going over basic stuff. And so there's this idea floating around the LinkedIn verse that awareness is just when someone knows that you exist, basically. And I've seen this example of Tiny Mustache Man or the world's worst human being as an example to illustrate that, well, just because you know of a company or a person, like, why is that a goal, right? Because I could be aware of a whole bunch of companies or people that I am never going to buy from or who I'm never going to buy from. But this criticism is a significant misunderstanding and misapplication of what awareness actually means. And so it's really important to define this stuff. Anytime you look at, and it sounds like pretentious or something to say marketing literature, but I don't know what other words to use, like publications, studies, science, I mean, whatever you want to call it. When you look at when awareness is talked about, what you will see is that awareness always refers to brand plus category awareness. You can talk about awareness outside of that, but you shouldn't because that's not ultimately what we're talking about. Or at least I should say, when people are referencing large bodies of marketing science and representing the actual discipline, like when people like that are talking about awareness, they're not talking about this weird definition that it's just you know of a company or a person, you know they exist. That's no one credible is defining awareness that way. So awareness means brand plus category knowledge. What this means is that it isn't awareness if the brand isn't directly tied to the category. So this is why if you are shooting for awareness from the perspective of just we want people to know that we exist, that is likely not to lead to business outcomes, which is what we are all here to do. There is literally no one disagreeing about that. But the point here again is that that definition actually really matters. Now, part of the reason that is the case, but not all of the reason, is that when you actually measure awareness, you need to prime or prompt a person. So the way that top of mind awareness is typically calculated is that you would do a survey of your market and a representative sample. You can do this in both B2B and B2C in any company. Sometimes it's a little harder to get at your target, but in any case, you would survey, let's just say 500 people. Let's say that's representative of your target market. What you would do if you're calculating top of mind awareness is you would basically just ask what brands come to mind when you think of, I'm wearing a HubSpot shirt, so I can go with this example. What brands come to mind when you think of CRM? Or you would just simply ask, name the CRM brands that come to mind. Immediately in that question, of course, is the fact that we are priming a person with the category of CRM. So you can't measure awareness without using a frame for what the awareness actually is. I mean, because otherwise you would need to just ask someone, have you heard of blank and not attach the category to it. But notice how no one cares about that. No, notice how no one is trying to measure awareness that way because that's not what it actually is. This is just a really bizarre idea. So again, awareness is the percentage of a category that associates you to the category. It is not the percentage of people who know you exist. It is not the percentage of people who have seen your name or logo. It's the percentage of people who know you in the context of the category. Once again, though, the term awareness is sometimes used to refer to cases where a market knows a brand exists, irrespective of the category. This is why it's crucial in these conversations and discussions to actually be operating from the perspective of clear definitions that everyone agrees to. If everyone doesn't agree, then at least you still need to be operating in your conversations with your team, with clients, with the market about what you are actually saying when you say awareness, and also trying to understand what other people mean when they say awareness. What I'm trying to get across here, again, I hope it's just brutally clear at this point, again, is that when most people who talk about this, who are referencing actual marketing science and research, talk about awareness, they're talking about awareness in the context of category and brand level awareness. So again, we can just dispense wholesale with this idea that there are people advocating for awareness irrespective of the category or salience or mental availability or business growth, because there's no one doing that. Okay. It's not a thing. I don't know. Like we like let's get away from that. Secondly, there is an important distinction between aided and unaided awareness. You will see this term used in different research methodologies, etc. It's pretty straightforward, but basically it just refers to how you are priming a person. So aided awareness means in the survey question, when you are getting the awareness measurement, you are giving people the list already. So the survey question would literally be, please select from the following brands that you think of when you think CRM. So if I was HubSpot, hey, shout out HubSpot. I like free things. If you want to give me another shirt, this one's getting a little faded. DM me on LinkedIn. In the survey question, I would literally say, like if I worked for HubSpot, I would say, which of the following, please select the following CRM brands that you think of with CRM in the CRM category. And then you'd have like, Salesforce, HubSpot, Zoho, Microsoft, what is it, Dynamics? I don't know. Bunch of CRM brands. And that's aided because you are aiding the person, the respondent, with the brand name. This is better for smaller brands that don't yet really have that recognition, because unaided means you don't give that list and you literally just ask, name the brands that come to mind when you think of CRM, and you do not give any brand options. That's unaided awareness. Both of these are always going to be higher, of course, the percentage-wise for the market leader. That's the entire point. But like I said, aided is typically a better choice in the case of smaller brands who are going to show potentially a non-response on unaided awareness if they're not big enough in the category yet. So again, notice how we actually have definitions. Notice how we actually have methodologies about this stuff. And notice how ultimately it is directly tied back to the category and to business outcomes. Now, the next thing, just to review, right, is that there are further distinctions, very, very important distinctions between awareness, salience, and mental availability. It's really important, as with all of this stuff, again, to actually get our terminology at least ballpark correct, because there are differences between all of these things. Awareness at the base layer, we just defined it, right? Again, it's name and category recognition, brand name plus category. If you don't have either, but you can only really have the brand, you can't just have category awareness. You need both for it to be awareness. If it's not both, it's not awareness. We can use another term, okay? Shouldn't use the term awareness there. Now, that is determined again by basically if I'm talking to someone and I say, name the brands that come to mind when you think CRM, they're going to name a bunch of brands. And for all those brands, it would be said that those brands have awareness for that individual person. And then you do that at scale, and that's where you get the percentage, right? Top of mind awareness percentage. Salience is one level up from this. And Aaron Brigbass really helped to define these terms. There's a great article in the B2B Institute that reviews, I think it's situational context off the top of my head. I think that's the one where these terms are really laid out clearly. And so salience basically is the same as awareness, except salience is really saying the brand comes to mind first. So the difference between awareness and salience is that awareness is just all the brands you think of, right? Which is why it's a very broad metric and why it isn't the core objective, which I'm also going to touch on in this episode. But salience means, let's say we're talking and I say, name the brand that comes to mind first when you think of coffee. It's very big, right? But you might say Starbucks, you might say Dunkin', you might say Tim Hortons. Same thing in B2B context. Name the brand that comes to mind when I say CRM. If you ask me that, I would say either HubSpot or Salesforce. So salience is named first, awareness is just total named. And so again, salience is one level up from awareness. It's still an important measure, but again, it's kind of like another important definition and term that should be used in certain contexts. But generally speaking, if you're going to measure this stuff, you want to measure either awareness or mental availability, which I'm going to talk about just in 1 second. Salience is kind of like the middle of the road. It's still a useful metric, but I think in a lot of cases, like top of mind awareness is a good just pulse on is our brand marketing working? Because again, if people are connecting the brand to the category, your brand marketing is doing part of its job, not all of its job, but part of it. And then you have salience, which is kind of between awareness and mental availability. And then finally at the top, and I say top because it's ultimately the most important thing we're trying to influence here, which is mental availability. And so mental availability is awareness in a buying situation. So mental availability means that if I were talking to you and I say, name the brand that comes to mind when you think of managing contacts for real estate companies, that's a very different question than when I say CRM. The reason this matters, and we've talked a ton about mental availability on this show, but the reason this matters so much is because people think of brands and generally make decisions based on the context. So the CRM you choose is is not irrespective of the category. It's not fair to say that, but the CRM you choose really is more aligned to the situation more so than the category, simply because you could have a situation where Salesforce does not get chosen, right? Which is why lots of brands don't choose Salesforce because their situation, their context is unique to HubSpot or maybe Copper or Zoho or whatever. And so mental availability means I name the brand when prompted by a situation. And this is the thing that we're really trying to move because mental availability is one of the core functions of growth. It also correlates strongly with market share. We know actual market share, so mental market share and market share are strongly correlated. And the reason they're not one-to-one is largely because of physical availability. But the point is that we know that mental market share matters a lot. And we know that mental availability matters a lot because we know that in particular, B2B, the purchase happens before the purchase happens, meaning 86% or so, depending on the source, of buying decisions involve choosing one of the vendors who is on the day one shortlist, and the research happens before vendors engage with, or excuse me, prospects engage with a vendor. So mental availability matters, I would say equally in B2B and B2C, but the point is that that's what it means. It's essentially awareness in a situation. So you can think of mental availability as situational awareness, which is the title of that B2B Institute article I mentioned. So again, it's kind of like at the bottom of awareness, then you have like first place awareness, which is salience. You could think of it that way. And then you have situational awareness at the top. So there are tiers of awareness and they all are important, but mental availability is the thing we're really trying to move. It's not fair to say that awareness is our main objective or the objective. I've seen it framed as the objective. Awareness isn't the objective. It is an important one because you can't have mental availability without awareness either. And so ultimately, the more awareness at the level of the category you have, the bigger you tend to be. If you look at top of mind awareness and its correlation with market share, you're also going to see the same thing within any category. It doesn't matter what it is. So awareness has a connection to business outcomes and business results, but by no means by no means is it the end all be all. It absolutely isn't. One of the reasons that people like me are fans of awareness and brand awareness, though mental availability is like the most important thing with respect to brand marketing, but awareness matters because it is one of the important preconditions for efficiency in your performance or direct response marketing. There's a massive irony in this whole conversation, which is that, again, there's so much boxed linear thinking and a lack of systems thinking and nuanced thinking with respect to the ecosystem of marketing. And there's this desire I keep seeing to like put awareness in this box over here where it's totally cut off from all the other stuff we do, almost as if there's no acknowledgement this could be influencing the entire system. And the thing is, that's completely bogus, and we now actually have really good data on that. So TikTok has studied this themselves. LinkedIn has studied this themselves, which is basically that when you pair, and I mean, I'm not even mentioning the long and the short of it because that's just like a given. If you haven't read that, like, what are you doing? And so the point is that when you combine awareness, or let's just say when you combine the long and the short, right? So you have like the long-term brand and you have short-term activation, the short works significantly better. And so TikTok actually broke this out into tiered phases of awareness in the graph that I'm picturing in my head when they did this study, and they just looked at, because they are a huge advertiser, and they just looked at brands that had different levels of awareness and and the percentage lift of their performance marketing. And it is staggering. And in fact, it's so significant that between the bottom tier of awareness and the top tier of awareness, the difference in performance marketing performance was enough basically to make the difference between positive and negative cash flow, or I should say positive and negative return, essentially, right? And the fact that this is true, like, it just doesn't, this is what we're talking about. This is, no one is saying that awareness is just like this, we just want to be known. It's like, no, there are hard business outcomes here that we're making the case for. It's not just TikTok. LinkedIn did the same thing. And in their case, again, they looked at two cases of brand plus performance, performance only, and the conversion rate on performance only was 0.2%. Conversion rate on brand plus performance, I think, was 1.2%. So again, massive lift. And then, of course, you have the IPA work and well, Bennett and Fields work in the long and the short of it. And so there's a pile of empirical data on this to show that it's the two together, and that's not only the two together, it's that the short-term stuff actually works ironically more efficiently when you pair it with the brand stuff. It's not that you have silos, right? It's not that you have lead gen over here, so you have like the scientific white lab coat people making the money over here, and then you have like touchy-feely art people over here, and we should keep them separate. That's insane. It's insane because we have enough really good data to justify the claim that it's insane, because these two teams, if they're even separated out at all, these two functions, these two inputs need to be working together. They need to be working together because that's how you're going to get the congruence, the coherence, and ultimately see the impact, as per Bennett and Field, on increases in pricing, profitability, penetration, share. In other words, all of the things that we're actually trying to accomplish as marketers. And so again, it's just crucial that we get these conversations correct, because there's still a lot of misinformation about it. But again, awareness is not the main objective. It is part of the objective. And again, the reason for that is that awareness is not the only precondition, but it is a precondition for the efficiency of your direct response and your performance working. And when I say direct response, I'm also talking about outbound sales too. You're going to get better response rates and you're going to get better performance from outbound if someone knows who you are. And again, whether it's TikTok or LinkedIn or independent third parties like the IPA, we have enough really strong evidence to make the case that these two things work in harmony, the long and the short work in harmony, and denying that would be very silly. Final thing just to touch on is like this distinction between awareness and demand creation, and because I've just seen and heard some things. And look, I've been on about the fact that I think demand gen is just a dumb term for been saying that for a while now. I didn't always think that, but it just there's so much again, there's the confusion that this creates is significant. It's like awareness versus demand creation. I mean, you ask one market what demand creation is, and they think it's performance marketing, and another, it's like we're so lost and confused with this, and it doesn't need to be that way because we've been talking about above the line and below the line since the 50s. Like we covered this decades ago. It's just like we put a band-aid over it when like we didn't have a cut. It's just like a lot of B2B marketers didn't know this stuff. So look, I think again, awareness, there are different tiered approaches, and then demand creation, depending on how you define it, is ultimately going to come down to what we mean by demand. And this is, again, a very significantly important point. The reason that you can't create market demand is because demand is a function of needs. And so human needs interacting with the environment. This is relatively well understood, I would say. So demand is just the amount that a given market is willing to pay for a product or service at a given time at a given price. And so the reason that you can't create demand, again, is because that market demand is a function of human needs, both in B2B and B2C, interacting with the environment. And if you think you're creating demand by introducing like a new product or service, like that's great. You're going to have success with that if you're solving a real problem. But the reason you're not actually creating market demand is because you're addressing a need that was always there. It was just not solved in a good way before. Like with toothpaste, I mean, toothpaste didn't create demand for itself. It just solved brushing your teeth a lot better than the options that were there before. The need for brushing teeth is a function, and by extension, the market demand for toothpaste is a function of the human need for clean teeth. It's just that toothpaste took off because it's just the best way to clean teeth. Now, to be fair to the demand gen folks, like it's still a term that we use at Storybook too, like brand and demand. I just think that, definitions are important. And sure, you could say that when we say demand creation, we're talking about creating demand for our brand. But that's where I would say that's just mental availability. Like, let's just use the scientific terms. Like, we have large institutes that are really paving the way here. Like, we can skip the line here a little bit and just go to like, yeah, that's just mental availability. Like, demand creation is just mental availability. And that's really well understood and really well studied. Like, we don't need to use these confusing terms anymore because we have way better ones. We have better terms to use. So I wanted to finish on that note. Finally, before I end here too, as I'm talking, I was prompted by another relevant thought as it relates to awareness, which is that, and I've said this before, right? Like focusing on awareness, if you define it improperly, is going to lead you as astray as you would go if you didn't do any at all. Maybe marginally different, but when you think of awareness as just like we want people to know that we exist, you do stuff that doesn't associate your brand, specifically your distinctive brand assets, with a category entry point, which is the entire point of brand marketing, ultimately, is to create that mental availability. So at the very least, your awareness efforts must associate your brand with the category. If they're not doing that, then you're not successful. And this is, as I've said before, one of the biggest pitfalls of what I see in a lot of content marketing, which just aims to be educational and funny and entertaining. All of that stuff is great, but in a lot of cases, it fails to create the association, the necessary association between the brand and the buying situation. And ironically, you may go this route. So I say route because I'm Canadian. You may go this route if you approach this from a kind of traditional or classical, I don't even know what you want to call it, but like if you approach this from kind of demand gen, we need to market the problem perspective. If you do that in your content marketing, you may very well fall into the same problem where you just create educational content that does not at all in any way associate your brand with the category or the category entry point, right? That's ultimately what you're trying to do. If you spend all your time like educating on the problem without making those associations, you're not building mental availability and you won't grow. So you can also, ironically, go astray trying to do the demand gen thing equally as you would go astray if you try to do the awareness thing without a grounding in what awareness is, what salience is, and what mental availability is, and why mental and physical availability are so important and their role to play in growth overall. So I hope this helps to kind of set some records straight. If you think that it does, please share this. That would be awesome if you got value out of this. If you think I'm right and that this is helpful and useful, please share this on LinkedIn or anywhere else. If you think I'm wrong or full of BS, that's also fine too. I always say like, come on, we can have a public conversation about this. If you think I'm wrong, like come on and prove it in front of lots of people on LinkedIn Live. You can laugh and point fingers at me if the stuff that I'm saying is wrong. If you want to challenge me, like let's do it. Come on and show me why I'm wrong about demand gen and awareness. Show me, like, because I have the IPA and work and the B2B Institute and Ehrenberg Bass and Kantar and TikTok and Bain and Company and Google. I have pretty heavy hitters on my side, which, and it sounds aggressive or flippant or something, and I don't mean to be that way, but it's a little bit like there's so much straw manning. I'm gonna rant here. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna freaking do it because there's a lot of straw manning of the brand position, and frankly, it pisses me off. Like, if you're going to engage in this conversation, critique those sources because that's where we're coming from. We're coming from the IPA data bank. We're coming from Ehrenberg Bass. We're coming from the BDB Institute and WARC, which is the World Advertising Research Council. Like, we're coming from big institutions, the goal of which they spend all of their time putting out empirical data on this. And so if you're going to engage in the like brand is dumb and it doesn't drive business results, literally there's a marketing architects episode about how brand drives revenue, going deep into a very thorough study about the subject. It's like the empirical data isn't hiding. Like, this is what drives me so nuts about this conversation. Like, it's not hiding anywhere. So if you're going to engage in this conversation, like, it has to be a good faith one. And there's so much straw manning of the position that I think is either ignorant or conscious. Like, I don't know what the other options are. As if like there's this dichotomy that's being set up is like you have the brand people who don't know what ROI is or understand business, and then you have again like the white lab coat people who know what they're talking about and understand business and finance. And it's like the irony is that the business centric finance-driven approach understands that 30 to 50% of a brand's valuation is the brand itself, according to Kantar data, which again is another great source for this stuff. Like, it drives me a little nuts. Again, if you're going to have a conversation about this stuff and you're going to preach and you're going to offer opinions publicly and say stuff about the other position, critiquing a position is awesome. But if you're going to do it, like, I haven't heard a criticism once about Kantar, the IPA, B2B Institute, Ehrenberg Bass, how brands grow. I haven't heard really great criticisms of that stuff. I haven't. So, or 6 Sense Buyers Report, like Bain and Company. The list just goes on. It's ridiculous. But again, if you're going to critique this stuff, like, critique the actual position. Don't critique a version of the position that you think is true because it makes you feel better about the ideological box that you're stuck in. That's what I'll say on that point. Thank you for listening. Appreciate it. Please do share this if it's helpful. And until next time, all the best.